Okay, we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 to 27. And over the next 2 weeks, I want to talk to you about 7 signs of a healthy church. But today, I'm just going to give you the first. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on it because I think it's important. This is probably one of the most important things I will talk about this year, this week, next week. In terms of the health of a church as we think about how to grow and sustain that thing. All right? I want to start with a couple of questions. First of all, here's an example. How would you know if a church was actually healthy? All right? Not just a house church, any church. Second question, how would you know if your faith was actually healthy? Most people look in the mirror and they are very aware of kind of the physical, appearances. But how many of us are actually looking in the mirror, reflecting on our spiritual health? Like, how am I doing spiritually? Third question, why is health, both yours and the church's, so important? Most people, I think, are actually fairly good at spotting unhealthy churches. They're like, oh my gosh. And do you know what most of them think? They're like, man, I sure wish somebody would do something about this. In other words, even when we spot unhealth, we think it's somebody else's problem. Okay? What I want to do is take a fresh look at what makes a church healthy and what makes a person healthy, and I want us to think about our role in those things. I think the early church actually had everybody pitching in, and that's part of the reason their churches were so healthy. So, I believe this could help you become an agent of change in any church that you're in, from now through the rest of your life. That would actually be a pretty significant thing. So, what is the first sign of a healthy church? You ready? Endurance. That's all I want to talk about today, is endurance. Okay, our need for endurance, the basis for endurance, the importance of endurance, some keys for endurance. So, need, basis, importance, keys. And I think this is important for churches, and I think it's also important for people. Okay? So let's talk about the need for endurance. We just looked at 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and I want to point something out. In verse 22, this is kind of a famous verse, Paul says, I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might what? Save some. Okay? In other words, Paul is talking about how people are saved, how they become rescued, how they become Christians. Okay? Now, I want to point something out. This is really interesting. Okay. Look at verse 19. I have made myself a servant to all that I might, what? Win them. Look at verse 20. To the Jews I became like a Jew that I might win Jews. Verse 20b. To those under the law I became like those under the law, in order that I might win those under the law. Look at verse 21. To those outside the law, he's talking about Gentiles, I became like someone outside the law, in order that I might win those outside the law. Look at verse 22. To the weak I became weak, in order that I might win the weak. Now listen, how are people saved? Not by believing things, or not simple. Let me say it this way. Somebody being saved and rescued is not simply getting them to believe the right things, or to acknowledge the right things, or even to live a certain way. You have to win them. They need to be won. Now, follow that so far? Okay. Now look at what comes next. In this passage, this is verse 24 down to 27, but focus on 24. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may what? Obtain it. Now, do you notice? When he says run that you may obtain it, what's he saying? Run that you might win. I want you to think about something. In every race that you are in here on this earth, how do you win it? By beating other people. If you want to win the Christian race, how do you win it? By winning other people. We have to learn how to be winners of other people's hearts. Are you someone that knows how to win the hearts of people that don't share your convictions about Jesus? Can you actually help them go, oh my goodness, this makes sense, this is true? Winning their hearts, not just arguments. Okay? Because that's how people are actually saved. How does that happen? And this is what I want you to think about. This is really, really important to the health of a church. How people are won changes over time. Now, here's what I mean by that. You're going to have to put on your thinking caps for just a second. I actually think every single, this is a theory, by the way, so if you don't agree with this, totally fine. But this is a theory, and I think it works. I think every single culture actually moves through 3 distinct phases. And in each phase, people are won slightly differently. So the very first phase is what I would call pre-Christian culture. All right? When Paul is running around and he says, hey, have you heard about Jesus? People are like, who's that? Have you heard about grace? What's that? Have you heard about the resurrection? They're like, what? And the news about Christianity spread like wildfire because nobody had ever heard about it. So all you had to do to win it, to win people, you had to talk about Jesus, okay, and model a different kind of community, but it was very, very quick. Okay, here's the second phase, which inevitably happens when lots of people start to become Christians. This happened about 300 years, so AD 350, okay, Christianity becomes the dominant faith in the Roman Empire, not because they decreed it, but because it had won the hearts of people. But the majority position starts to become Christian, and you move into a phase that's called Christendom. Now listen, what's really interesting about Christendom, okay, news about Jesus is more like background radiation or background noise. Here's what I mean. You're like, hey, Brennan, have you heard about Jesus? And you're like, yawn. Of course, been hearing about Jesus my entire life. Well, do you believe in him? Of course I believe in Jesus. Okay? You believe in grace? Of course I believe. Who doesn't believe in grace? Okay, what about the resurrection? Yeah, I know. After I die, I'm going to go to heaven because I believe about Jesus. You see what I'm saying? When Christianity becomes the dominant culture, the spread of news about it doesn't really spread because everybody thinks they're already Christian. But their understanding of that news is not very potent. It's not very life-changing. It's already everywhere, but it's very, very diluted. So for people who were raised in church culture, they look at it and think, Christianity is kind of a yawn. And most of us, especially if you're older, Blake's age, AP's age, my age, okay, we were actually raised, yeah, Blake, you are, I'm just breaking it to you. Truth and love, baby. Look at our heads. Yeah, we are older. Okay. Guys, we've been in Christendom for, I think, from 300. We're in the tail end of Christendom. Here in America, we are in the tail end of Christendom right now. And many of us who are, in our 50s have really experienced it. But a lot of you who are in your 20s and 30s are already seeing the change into the third phase, which is post-Christendom. Okay? And in post-Christendom, news about Jesus people tend to look at it like news about COVID. Like, I really hope it goes away and never comes back. And it'll probably linger, but let's just, hope you get over it. In other words, most people actually have a negative opinion about Christianity because they have seen how sick religion, and specifically Christendom, can actually make people. So they've exited Christianity, not because they didn't know Christians, but because they did. And they looked at the Christians that they knew, and that they saw that the knowledge about Jesus was not life-changing. And they said, many of the Christians I know are just as shallow, just as hedonistic, okay, as non-Christians I know. Actually, non-Christians are probably more caring and compassionate and truthful. And they said, why on earth would I ever want to be a Christian? That's what's wrong with this world. Now listen, they're not impressed, they're often wary, they're not usually seeking. If they are seeking, they're pretty sure Christianity is not where you'd look for answers. Okay, now listen, how do you win those people? If you just walk around and try to do what Paul did, stand in a corner and preach, you know what they're going to hear? They're going to be like, there's another idiot. And they are not even going to listen to you. Okay? So the way that you reach people, the way that you win people in a post-Christian culture, do you know what it is? You're going to have to confound them, which is exactly what Jesus did with the religious people in his culture. Okay? You are going to have to be as conservative as Jesus. Love the things he loved, believe the things he believed. But you're also going to have to be as liberal as Jesus. As friendly as he was, as caring as he was, as compassionate as he was. Remember, he was a friend of sinners. Okay? And yet he wasn't content just to let sinners languish. He's like, I'm a doctor and I came that they might be made well. You have to be as sacrificial as Jesus. And when you do these two things together, you are as conservative as Jesus, but as liberal as Jesus. Number one, it makes religious people who are still in Christendom very nervous. And it makes irreligious people, like, eventually, they start to go, what is this? This is different. So here's the key. You have to do it for a long haul. And that's the importance of endurance. Okay? I believe, this is my conviction, but I'd wager money on this. If you want to actually make a difference and win a skeptical post-Christian culture, okay? And if you're sitting there, now listen, everybody here, we're in Austin. We're like, oh, I see the skeptical post-Christian culture all around me. My friends are that way. But if you're not, let's say somebody listens to this later. Okay, back in Montana, lots of places around the country, Christendom's still alive and well. And all I'm going to say is, in 30 to 40 years, it's actually not nearly as alive and well as it looks. There are already a lot of people. In other words, what we're experiencing right now, I think is going to be the norm in the next 30 years everywhere. It's already pivoting there very, very quickly. So listen, if we're going to reach people in a post-Christendom culture, I think, okay, that we're going to need to add real value to skeptical communities of unbelievers in ways that they can appreciate, even if they don't share our convictions about Jesus, and we're going to have to do it to 10 to 20 years at a minimum if we have any hope of creating lasting cultural impact and change. Follow what I'm saying?
Sticking yourself in a place for 10 to 20.
We are going to have to find, like, listen, if you want to reach your skeptical, post-Christian neighbors, co-workers, or friends, I think that by and large, you're going to have to find a way of being in that mix for 10 to 20 years in a really countercultural way. where you are adding value to people outside your tribe. Okay? And if you do that, I think people are going to start to say, something's different. I think that's true for you as individuals. I think that's true for us as a church. Okay? That's why endurance is so important. Long obedience in a same direction. Okay? That's a Eugene Peterson book. It's worth reading. It's a marathon, not a sprint. That means we can't be a flash in the pan and then on to the next thing. We have got to figure out how to endure. And I said this already. We've been here 10 years. Great, we're just getting started. We got to figure out how to be here another 10. And we have to continue to add value in really significant ways. Okay? So that's my first point. The way that you win people. This is why we need endurance. Because in a post-Christian, secular, skeptical culture where they have really good data, well, it's all fake. We're going to have to live in a new and different way. Okay? Now, second thing. What's the basis for endurance? If it's a really big deal, wouldn't we see it in Scripture? And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you asked. Yes. This is a place, I'm just going to give you some passages, but I want you, I can do this in probably 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and by the end of it, you're going to be like, oh, it's all over the New Testament. For instance, Matthew chapter 16, Jesus says, upon this rock I will build my church. The gates of hell shall not prevail. Does that sound temporary or permanent? Sounds pretty lasting, right? In other words, Jesus is saying, I'm coming to build something that is not going to be shaken. It's not going to go away. Ephesians chapter 2. God is building a temple with his believers. It's built on Jesus. Okay? It has foundations. Again, you can go read that passage, but the point is, look at the builtness language that you find when Paul is talking about the church, when Jesus is talking about the church. Let me give you another passage. Galatians 6:7. We were here a couple of weeks back. Don't be deceived. God is not mocked. You will reap what you sow. In other words, and it goes both directions. Paul is saying we are sowing things, and the things that we are sowing are actually seeds that are going to bear fruit. So when we look around and we see churches struggling, we see culture changing, what we need to be saying is, what kind of fruit are we seeing, and what kind of seeds have we been planting, and what kind of seeds ought we to be planting? Okay, and then there's all the passages that mention endurance. You can go searching a little Bible app for this. I'm just going to give you, search for ENDUR asterisk. So it'll pick up endure, endures, endurance, anything like that. Listen, let me give you some examples. Mark chapter 13, verse 13, or 15, one of those. The one who endures will be saved. Jesus said that. Sounds pretty important. Luke chapter 21, verse 19. By endurance, you will gain your lives. He's talking about difficult times for Christians. John chapter 6, verse 27. Don't work for food that perishes. Work for food that endures to eternal life. Endurance. Romans chapter 5, verses 23. What produces endurance? Anybody know? Suffering. 1 Corinthians 4:12. We labor, says Paul. We work with our own hands. When we are reviled, we bless. When we are persecuted, we endure. Okay? You can find the similar thing in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He says we are jars of clay passage. We're struck down, but we're not. Like, it's this language of like, we are hard pressed, but we endure. We hold on. We last. Hebrews 12:7. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons, heirs. There are so many more passages. The point is, and I would really encourage you to do this, go back and spend time this week looking at all the passages in the New Testament that talk about endurance, and ask yourself, what might God be trying to say to me through these texts? What should I be hearing? All right? That's the basis for endurance. It's all over the place in the New Testament. So first of all, the need for endurance, if we're actually going to win a skeptical culture. Second of all, the basis for endurance, all over the New Testament. Third, I want to give you a practical reason why endurance is really important. Endurance is a huge problem for the American church and for American Christians. Let me illustrate. It is a problem for traditional churches. And here I'm going to pick on Presbyterians because I am a Presbyterian. But I'm going to use my sister denomination, the PCA, Perfect Church in America, which that was the first church I planted, so I can still pick on them. The PCA, I'm using them because they're actually way better than the EPC. The EPC stands for the Easy Presbyterian Church, and we suck at everything, including church planting. But listen to the PCA. They actually have the courage to publish their results on how they're doing. You ready for this? The PCA plants 50 to 60 churches per year. That's actually pretty decent for a small little Presbyterian denomination. The EPC, by the way, we only have 50 to 60 church plants total, period. We probably plant 5 to 6 a year. We're remedial compared to the PCA. Okay, but listen to this. Of the PCA's 50 to 60 church plants per year, a third fail within the first 4 years. Ouch. After the first 4 years, the survival rate goes way up to 68%. If you're doing the math, like I take away a third and then I take 6, we have a success ratio of about 45%. Okay? Half the PCA churches that have shuttered since 2001, so over the last 25 years, 4 years, were church plants, which means the other half weren't church plants. The PCA also happens to be, along with the EPC, one of the oldest churches in the country, meaning most of its people are actually in their 60s. That's the average median age. So you do the math and go, we've got churches full of 60-year-olds who suck at planting churches. 45% success rate. Now here's the thing. Before we pile on and go, man, Presbyterians suck. When you look around at just Protestant churches in the U.S., nobody is consistently doing a great job of planting churches. Okay? Now listen, I'm talking about traditional churches here. Why is it so difficult? I'll give you one reason. Takes a lot of money. The average church plant in the PCA right now probably takes at least $500,000 in outside money. Okay? Very, very expensive. Church plants in Presbyterian churches tend to connect primarily, do you know who they connect with? Presbyterians from other churches. Okay? Now listen, I've been kind of piling on traditional churches. It's a problem for house churches too. I've said this before. This is an anecdotal observation, but I would love for somebody to prove me wrong. Based on what I'm seeing as a house church planter, trying to keep tabs on who else is planting house churches, it seems to me that the average lifespan of a house church is 2 years or less. Okay. So if you went into a culture where 60 to 70% of the kids died before age 20, you'd say, I think you guys might have some infant mortality problems. This isn't healthy. Follow what I'm saying? Okay. Now listen. What's a problem for the traditional church and a problem for the house church is also a problem for individual Christians. When I look back on the people that we connected with in Missoula, and we connected with a lot of post-Christian people. 85% of our church didn't come from another church. We had lots of conversions, but guess what? I would say at least 35% of people who came to faith, who said like, I believe, I didn't believe, I believe now. I'd guess at least a third of those no longer profess faith. Okay? And we had a bunch of people that actually started coming back to church where they're like, man, I haven't been in church in ages, and I feel like my faith is coming alive again, and this is really good. I would say a third of those people are no longer connected to church. So even there, in other words, this isn't just a church problem, this is actually a people problem. Okay? And if you ask the question, why is this happening? Okay, I think part of it, this is a simplistic answer, is we don't know how to win people, and we don't know how to really be won by Jesus. Let me unpack that just a little bit. Part of the reason, first and foremost, it's always been difficult. Paul talks about people falling away. And he says, look, it happens. Church is struggling. It happens.
Oh, it's the sower.
Yeah, okay. Seed lands in different places. Jesus says part of this is just the nature of the spiritual journey. It is hard. Matthew chapter 7. The way is hard, few find it. But part of this, and this is the importance, I hear a lot of Presbyterians who look at our lack of success and they say, man, the soil's just really hard. I actually think the soil is fine. Okay? But it takes a special approach. And you've got to understand your context. And we need to understand that we're actually sowing some seeds now that will bear fruit 20 years from now. And that is true of churches, and that's true of you. You're sowing seeds right now that are going to bear fruit 20 years from now. And the question is just, are you aware of what you're sowing? Okay? Many people say, boy, sounds like we got a problem. I sure hope somebody does something about it. And I think Paul is saying, guys, we need to do something about it. So if you aspire to be a pastor or a leader or just a healthy Christian who helps build healthy Christian communities, wherever you are, you've got to do a much better job of understanding the times and what seeds you're sowing right now. See why this is important? This ought to be really big on our radars. And in my experience, it's not very big on Christians' radars generally, and it's not very big on pastors' radars. And it's not even very big on church planners' radars. That's why I think it's so critical, because we're at a time and a place in our culture where we are shifting into post-Christendom, and we need to be prepared to sow the seeds in a way that they will bear fruit in this soil. Okay? So, fourth point. What are the keys to creating faith and churches that endure? I'm just going to give you 5 things. These are my opinions, but I think they're pretty well founded. Okay? I would encourage you to go back and think about these this coming week. First of all, I think your model matters, but I want to qualify that. Okay, when I talk about model, I'm speaking specifically of like traditional church versus house church right now. And I just want to say, I actually think your model does matter. Okay, as you move into a post-Christian culture, if you're still trying to do church in a Christendom way, you might find that it's not very effective. However, even as I say that, I want to say there is no silver bullet. I think every model is going to have challenges. So let me try to illustrate this for you. Traditional church. You know what the biggest thing is that helps a traditional church endure? Money. Listen, if you're a church with a lot of money, you can buy buildings, you can buy budgets, you can hire staff, you can put on programming, and you can actually attract an audience. Okay? But I would just say, even if you have all those things, that doesn't actually mean you're winning people in the culture. I think traditional church is sometimes like a motorboat. Money is the motor. More money equals a bigger motor. But with a bigger motor, it's easier for a whole bunch of people to sit back and just enjoy the ride. Okay? That's the challenge for traditional church. And as people start to bail on their traditional church, the money starts to go away, and all of a sudden the motor doesn't run. Now listen, house church, okay, you might be like, house church is great. It doesn't take any money. All right, woohoo! But guess what? You got to have engagement. House church, if big church, traditional church is like a motorboat, house church is like one of those big dugout canoes where we're all paddling. Okay? Now listen, if you have a house church with like, let's say, 30 people in a big long canoe, and 15 of them are sitting back like, woo, this is fun. Okay? You're not going to go anywhere very fast. So for house church, the challenge is, number one, we got to learn how to connect with our culture, but everybody needs to learn how to connect with our culture, at least to some capacity. We grow slowly, people move on. What that means is we've all got to learn how to do the work. We've all got to paddle, and we've all got to learn how to make more canoes so that when you move on, you can continue to build Christian community wherever you are. That's the challenge for how. So there's a challenge no matter what your model is, but I do think model matters. That's the first thing. Second thing, right now matters. It is really easy to look down the road and think, oh, we'll get to this in a certain time, once we get stable. Okay? 2 Corinthians 6:2 says, now is the favorable time. Now is the day of salvation. Hebrews chapter 3, today if you hear the Lord speaking, respond, act. In other words, don't take endurance for granted for you or for your church. Every moment matters. There's a famous passage in Esther chapter 4 in the Old Testament. Esther 4:14, Mordecai, her uncle, says to Esther, this young virgin girl who's been taken into the harem of the king, while the people of Israel, there's a death sentence on all of them. It's going to be genocide. Okay? And Mordecai says, who knows, Esther, maybe you have come into the kingdom for just such a time as this. All through the Bible, we find instances of God using ordinary people as agents of rescue. So maybe God has brought you into this church to help us endure. And maybe God has brought us, this church, into your life to help you endure. Okay? Galatians 6:9 says, let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. Are you taking what you're reading and not just applying it personally, but actually thinking about how God might want to use that knowledge, not just in your life, but to help the church endure? Okay? This is an amazing passage for simple, ordinary people. It means that God has a purpose for you. And He wants to do something in your life to help you endure, but He wants to use you as you start to be changed to help other people endure too. Okay? Incredibly significant. In a house church, your little contribution goes way further than in a great big church where you give a great big contribution. You can have an outsized impact in a small-sized church. So the model matters, right now matters, prayer matters. Romans 15:30, Paul says, pray for me that I might be delivered. Listen, what does your praying life look like? Is it all about you and your needs? That's fine, you can pray for that. But where in your prayer life are you actively praying for the church, for the people in the church, the folks that you have made vows to, that you're supposed to be in covenantal relationship with? Okay, number 4. drawing near matters. I'm just going to read two passages out of Hebrews. If you turn to Hebrews chapter 10, this is verse 22 through 26. Listen to this. And what I want you to think is, listen to the practical advice he is giving us about how to actually draw near and endure. He says, draw near to God with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience, our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast. You hear the hold fast language? Endure to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. Let us consider how to stir one another up to love and good works. Let us not neglect meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encourage one another, all the more as you see the day drawing near. If we go on sinning deliberately, after having received the knowledge of the truth, there's no sacrifice for sins remaining. Listen, here's what he's saying. It's very practical. How are you doing at connecting with others in the church, sharing what's going on in your life, asking about what's going on theirs, okay? Encouraging one another to hold fast the confession, encouraging one another to draw near to God, encouraging one another to love and good works, encouraging one another to stop sinning deliberately. Do you see what I'm saying? Very, very practical. It's all of this one another language. You will never win people if they don't think that you actually care deeply about them. This is Hebrews chapter 10, verses 22 through 26. Okay? So model matters, right now matters, prayer matters, drawing near matters. Here's the most important one. Focus on Jesus. Flip the page and look at Hebrews chapter 12. This is the context of this. The author of Hebrews is trying to get people to do exactly what I'm talking about. And in chapter 10, he's going, you got to do a lot of one anothering of one another. And then in chapter 11, he points them at the great saints throughout the story. Okay, and you know what he does in chapter 12? He points them to Jesus. Listen to this, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, you've heard this passage before, let us also lay aside every weight, the sin which clings so closely. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and now he's seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Listen, you know what made Jesus able to endure? Joy. What was Jesus' joy? The Father? What else?
The bride.
What'd you say?
The bride.
The bride. And who's the bride? Sinners. Okay? Sinners who need rescue. Jesus looked at people that weren't in the kingdom, that were far from God, and he's like, I want to see those people know the Father like I do. You know what will help you? Share the same joy. Okay? Joy for the Father, joy for sinners. All right? And what will really help you, okay, is joy for Jesus. What gives you joy in your life? Is it your bank account? Is it what other people think about you? Is it your resume? Is it your accomplishments? Or is it the fact that Jesus loved you so much, he came down and did something to put you in the right place at the right time? I think about Balaam. Okay? We were talking last night. What an amazing, we connected through a mutual friend who was a doctor. And she's been diagnosed with cancer. She's all alone. Okay? And the friend is actually like, melted my heart a little, said to Balaam, I'm going to send you to some angels. I'm going to send you to a church. And she was talking last night about how meaningful this church has been to her. I'm sitting there going, do you know how meaningful she is to me? She is actually encouraging me. Balaam, you're encouraging me. This is my point. We have got to start seeing the Father's hand and seeing Jesus' hand and saying, I want to be a part of that. And if you do those things, you will endure, okay, and you will bear fruit. All right? Let's pray.